to Al-Qaeda or 9/11. Of course, 85% of the people in the United States were, quote unquote, affiliating Saddam Hussein with 9/11 and saying that, in fact, because they were going to rush in and bomb Iraq, that in fact his popularity ratings went up to 85%. But it was all predicated on a lie. But the reality was, according to Bugliosi says that when they put out the white paper on March the 19th, 2003, that in fact that they had doctored up the wordings of George Tenet's report to the Bush administration and used words that would indicate or that one might surmise that were words that were changed in the report to make it look like there was in fact an intelligence threat to the United States security. So basically the thesis of Vincent Bugliosi's book is the Bush administration doctored these reports in order to justify an incursion into Iraq, in order to do, as far as I'm concerned, in order to extrapolate the second largest oil fields in the world, and that was in Iraq. And the fact that this had been doctored intelligence, he's saying that every state in the United States, every Justice Department individual on federal levels and or state levels should be, for all of the peoples that died in Iraq, the soldiers that died from the different states in the U.S., that they should be held, he should be held, the Bush administration is held accountable for murder because they falsified documents knowing that they had nothing to do, there was no security threat when they sent those boys and girls, those soldiers, into Iraq and Afghanistan in order to invade the ground troops and the thousands that were dead, that in fact George Bush should be brought up on charges of murder. That's the thesis of his book. And of course, then Tony Hall, I'm sure he can talk about, what's her name again?
Charlotte Dennett.
Who?
Charlotte Dennett ran for Attorney General of Vermont on a platform that she would arrest and prosecute Bush
for
if
war
elected.
crimes.
For murder.
For
murder, not for war crimes, for murder.
So basically we're saying that there are thousands of people that every soldier that died in Iraq and Afghanistan have died predicated on false information given by the Bush administration. Now, my particular, where I may vary, and I don't say that my friend, my colleague, my brother here, Ramsey Clark, or anybody else even shares that. My particular views on this. When one says, I can't even say it as a question, my whole perspective as to why I got involved initially with this movement to bring Bush and Cheney and Condoleezza Rice and Donald Rumsfeld and that whole cabal, the neoconservative cabal of the Bush regime, is relative to the fact that I happened to be in New York City with my family at that time, stopped over at Ramsey's prior to my book, the autobiography of A Split in the Sky, from Attica to Gustafson Lake, which there is a box up here for anybody who's interested in getting one before the evening stroll. Well, we stopped, and we were there. We actually left the day before the Twin Towers were hit. Now, I, over the last 8 years, have been studying and researching every single aspect of what happened at 9/11. And it is my contention, and it's only my sole contention. I've never discussed it with Ramsey. I've discussed it with many people here, but I've spoken publicly over the years. All my investigation unequivocally shows that the Bush administration had a hand in bringing those towers down. And particularly Dick Cheney. was at the helm of bringing those towers down. Now I say, and have said right from day one, my belief that this was used as an excuse to create an incursion into the Mideast, into Central Asia, and to extrapolate the resources coming out of the Caspian Sea bases, that of oil and that for gas, and the pipelines running through those countries. But the reason that it was so important for me to go without, and you can go to my website, splittingthesky.net, and you can see all the talks that I've given on this. Some of the filmographers are here from the various talks I gave in Victoria, in Nanaimo. And I lay it all out, all of the players behind the scenes. Who was behind 9/11 and why? But the point of the matter is, and I keep trying to say it over and over and over again, that the only way that we're going to stop what Cheney calls the endless war on terror is by exposing 9/11 as an inside job. Because where does it end? Where does it end? There are 24 Canadians in this country that are dead, that nobody's asking questions. Why are they dead? What happened to them? There are 92 different nationals from countries around the world are dead. And nobody's saying what happened to them. If we can't address, without putting blinders on our eyes, what went down as a mass murder from inside the U.S. government in New York City on September 11, 2001, we're never going to come out of what has become a global police state. Yes, I personally got my wrongs, my inequities as a person, but as a person with a political view, a reality of how the system works. Is it hard to believe? Is it hard to convince an indigenous person where 50 million Indian peoples are dead in 500 years that such a thing could not happen within the United States and the powers beneath the whole military, corporate, industrial complex? These are things that we have to look at. And these are things that we can never stop asking questions until there is an independent investigation as to what really happened to bring these real criminals to justice. That's why on March the 17th of last year, when George Bush came to this country, came to Calgary to give a talk, that's why I was moved. That's why I was moved to come to this city and to demand an arrest on George W. Bush as a war criminal and any of the other particular peoples that work in his administration that comes to this country, according to Canadian law, in violation of Canadian law, that if you come to this country, we are going to attempt to arrest you for war crimes, for mass murder, and for torture. But it eventually is all going to end up on the people in the U.S. to bring them the actual indictments against George Bush and his whole cabal, the neoconservative administration. So now tomorrow, I go before a court. Tomorrow, I get a verdict as to the action I took a year ago, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I gave it my best with what I had. I gave it everything I got, and in the process, I've done some crazy stuff, some foolish things. But in the meantime, I still have not abandoned the fact that these people have to be held accountable. I'm asking the question, who's the real criminal? Am I the criminal for trying to apprehend the war criminals? Are you going to criminalize me? Or are we going to push to criminalize the real criminals? That's the question I have to ask. And if anybody else has any questions there, please feel free to ask any of us any questions that you have here. Thank you.
Thank you.